Hi, everyone. It's Jonathan Corrie from Precursive. Welcome along on this grey afternoon at 4 p.m. On a Friday in London. And I'm delighted to be joined by Nate Bitting, who is the VP of Customer Services Strategy and Operations from Alteryx. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is the name of the pup in the background that you've got there? You got your little dog there. Who's this?
Yeah, this is Dodger. We caught him. He was running into traffic, caused a little, fender bender, and so we called him Dodger because he was dodging traffic.
Nice,
Yeah.
amazing. I've got two dogs, Cosmo and Ace. They sound like a crime fighting duo. And
Yeah.
how is life in Arizona these days?
Oh, it's doing great. Yeah. My wife and I moved back to Arizona back in October, and
Yeah.
I'm originally from here, so it's been great to, visit with family and be around friends. So yeah, it's been good so far.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining. Really excited about what we're going to talk about today because I think it's a number of the things are very hot topics. So, just by way of like an intro to you and your role in a moment, but we had a great conversation a couple of weeks ago. I know a lot's happened, and you basically said to me, you said, Jonathan, I'm really good at telling you my life story,
Yeah.
which was cool. So I think it's a really nice story. So just let's start there. Like, how did you get into tech?
Yeah, sure. So, like I mentioned a little while ago, I grew up in Arizona. I grew up in a small farm town in the middle of nowhere. I'm actually from a big family. So I'm a twin. I have twins. I have a twin brother. I also have
Yeah.
twin sisters, and
Okay.
there's nine kids total. So,
Wow.
really, really big family. But, my dad was in construction, and, in the summers, my brother and I would go to work with him, and we quickly realized, yeah, we didn't want to have a job where it required us being at 100-degree weather every day.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I got to do something else. I didn't know what that was at the time. And then, in high school, I actually took courses in, computer hardware, operating systems, and networking. And so that's really kind of my intro to computers. And I was building gaming computers. I was fixing computers for, people at my church, things like that.
Yeah.
And I was also in a band. So I formed a band with some friends, and we did shows around Arizona. And this was before social media. And so we needed a way to kind of get our name out there a little bit and also be able to interact with our friends
Right.
or our fans. And so they offered
Our
a,
fans. I love it. Yeah.
yeah, and they had a web design course at my high school, and that was kind of my first introduction into programming. Was we needed to build a website for a band. So I did that, and then when I went to college, I still didn't know what I wanted to do. Originally, I actually wanted to go to music school because I was, in my band and everything. But I ended up going to Arizona State, and I started out as a marketing major, and then a mentor, that I worked with, he said, "Hey, you should think about accounting." He's like, it's really important to understand, how a company operates at a foundational level. And so I really liked my accounting courses, so I started doing that. And then I took a programming class for accounting majors, and that's what introduced me to Visual Basic. And I started learning,
Okay.
hey, I can automate some of these manual things that I'm doing in Excel. And I actually had a job at the time, and I automated a 3-week process into 15 minutes. And so that was like my intro to automation, and I fell in love with that. And then the professor of that course, he convinced me to switch my major to computer information systems. So
Yeah.
that's what I did. I graduated in 2008. My now wife and I, it was right after the financial collapse, not a lot of jobs, and we're like, well, hey, we're already in student mode. Let's go get our MBA. And my wife is from the Bay Area, so we moved to San Jose, California, and that's kind of where I started my career. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of my childhood and when I came.
Yeah. No, I love
Yeah,
it. I love it. What
yeah.
was the name of the band?
It was Immune to Malady. That was the name of the band. It was a
Immune to Malady. What is
yeah.
that? What's that about?
So malady is like sickness and illness,
No,
and
no, yeah,
yeah,
What?
we were just, we were dumb kids. We didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah.
We had previous names. Our first band was Chain Linked Fence. We had
That's a
we
better one.
had oh yeah,
I was gonna
yeah,
say like the first one is like that's way too articulate for its own good for a bunch of what, like 19, 20-year-olds, like,
Yeah. We also had Radio Flyer. Yeah. So,
Nice.
but
Nice.
yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. And so then tell me a little bit about your role right now, and then a few bits about kind of career highlights, because spent some time at Oracle and spent some time at Cisco and sort of all the things there. So just give us a quick overview of what you're doing, either work up to what you're doing now or the other way, go the other way back.
Yeah. I'll start from the beginning, and I'll keep it brief. So yeah, I started my career at Cisco Systems. I was there for almost 8 years. And it was really cool because my first day, there, I was in a senior vice president's office, and this guy ran an $8 billion business. So coming from, a small town to talking in billions of dollars blew my mind. But it was really awesome because I really got exposed to how leaders think at scale, and how do they strategize and manage the organization, and have all of these, thousands of resources, and getting them aligned and executing towards a common vision. And so there I did business operations, analytics, BI work. I was primarily in the advanced services organizations, which is what they used to call professional services, resource management, strategy. I had the opportunity to work on 4 acquisitions in the cybersecurity space. So I was doing that at Cisco. And then I actually went over to Palo Alto Networks. They hired their first VP of customer success there. And Palo Alto Networks is, one of the largest cybersecurity companies in the world. I believe they are now. But at the time they were, relatively small. And I was the first hire into that customer success team. And, my role there was to drive customer success automation and analytics. And, really the difficulty is it's cybersecurity. So there's tinfoil hat wearing people who don't like to share data. Telemetry was a challenge. We had some telemetry capabilities, but less than 2% of customers turn it on. And so I really focused on how do customers migrate from competing products to Palo Alto's platform? And they were doing like for like migrations, but the worry was they weren't taking advantage of all of the advanced capabilities of the platform. And so I built up a team of software engineers and product managers, and we built applications to take the customer's configuration and measure feature adoption. And not only are they using the features, but in cybersecurity, 99% of cyber attacks happen because customers don't configure their vendors' products the right way. And so we built a best practice assessment as well, where we can say, here's what you did, here's what you did wrong, and here's what you need to do to fix it, and why that's important, is along with all the documentation and how-to videos and things like that. And then, that role evolved into taking over some other parts of the company around support automation. So we had automation tools around support to drive case deflection, allowing support engineers to write signatures to detect known issues in the product. So that was a lot of fun, building all these things out and really, kind of experiencing that massive growth that Palo Alto did. So I was there for about 4 years, and then my boss left the company and went over to Oracle. And over there, I was there for about a year. And at Oracle, the organization we were in was Application Service Excellence, which includes all of their cloud applications on-prem application support team. So it's about 3,500, 4,000 people. And then they also had the North American customer success team as well. So I built up the strategy and operations function there. So business operations, analytics, the strategy, program management, things like that. And then that brings me to Alteryx. I've been at Alteryx I'm coming up on a year here next month. So a lot of folks who were at Palo Alto are at Alteryx. So our CEO, our chief customer officer, leaders in the sales organization. And, it's a really high potential company that, has been around for 24 years in the analytics space. And there's just so much potential, but, they really kind of need to figure out how do they scale from 500 million ARR to $1 billion. And so that's what brought me to Alteryx. And, I can talk more about that, or I'll let you ask questions.
Awesome. Well, it was one of the I think it was Nick Mehta had posted something on LinkedIn, and I'd seen one of your comments, and I think it's a fascinating area. We were talking, again, spoiler alert, we do prep for this this show, and we were talking about kind of the evolution of the of operations functions and the importance of like strategy functions. And it was really interesting to me because that was where I started my career in corporate strategy. I was telling you when I was a business that got bought out by Gartner, and kind of what I saw over a 5-year period as companies got disrupted by tech, these strategy functions went away. Essentially, they got displaced. They got displaced by tech or just change. But it's kind of coming back really through the tech piece, particularly in tech companies, and it sort of manifests in CS operations, PS operations, sales operations, RevOps, all of this. Really, the intelligence and the heartbeat of the company, and sort of figuring out the infrastructure and how you scale it. And you made a really great comment, which is like, given the enterprise experience, the Palo Alto Networks experience, you've seen these different sort of altitudes, and then you find it. We were talking about like in some of these mid-market companies how you can be in a job and it's the biggest job you've ever had, right? Because you grow so quickly, and then suddenly you're in this massive organization that you have no frame of reference about. So I think it's fascinating. So in your career, I think you just talked about it. You've been involved in building operations for CS, for PS, and business operations in general. Like, why is this type of capability in your view so critical?
Yeah, I mean, Peter Drucker is attributed to this, but it's like you can't improve what you can't measure. And also, there's I found this quote as I was preparing for this that I thought was that kind of explained it really well. It's measurement is the first step that leads to control and eventually improvement. If you can't measure something, you can't understand it. If you can't understand it, you can't control it. And if you can't control it, you can't improve it. And oftentimes there's just so many foundational elements that are required to run an effective services business. And the way I kind of think about operations is, I'll create a visual picture for the audience. You have sales. Like when you think of sales, you kind of know what they do. Finance, you know what they do. Marketing, you know what they do. But then there's all this white space, right, in between all of these functions. And what's the forcing function to make sure that they're collaborating and aligning on a shared vision and really the glue? And that's what operations is in my mind, right? It's making sure that we're aligned on our strategic imperatives, and that we're measuring and holding the leadership teams accountable for actually executing against that and achieving those goals and outcomes. So, from my perspective, every company has resources that they need to manage effectively to drive some sort of return, whether that be for the ownership or the shareholders. And so that could be cost savings, revenue growth, profitability. And I know we're going to talk about the evolution of business operations and the different phases, but you got to start somewhere. And I've been in companies where it's been undervalued, these support functions like operations, and you can see the as they start to grow, they have scaling challenges when they don't invest in those things. So,
yeah, no, I love it. It's something we're talking about in our business. Like, we're a much smaller business than any of the ones that you've worked in, but even now we're like 50 people, right? And the thing that I'm we work with customer success teams and services teams in larger organizations like we want to be like in terms of size. We're constantly seeing sort of the patterns. And what's interesting is, like, I was talking to a customer the other day and I said, if you were to ask members of your team, like, what's your mission within your department and what are your goals and what are your key KPIs? And you ask 5 people, do you think you'd get consistent answers? And they were like, yeah, definitely. And I believed them. It's probably true. And I said, and then if you were to ask your colleague, for example, in CS, the same thing, what would they say? And they say, yeah, it's true. They'd say, okay, great. And then if we asked those 10 people, how do you work together with your colleagues, and where do you overlap, and what's the transitions between the two? People start scratching their head, right? And they're like, oh, well, that's where all the friction happens. That's where the baton gets dropped, right? Yeah. And it's these intersections, like we have this precursive proverb that accidents happen at handovers, as it were, and intersections. And it is so true. So you just, like, that's why I was fascinated to talk to you. And so if you're scaling, and the audience for this show is everyone from startups to mid-market startups, scale-ups, and then and enterprise companies. and everyone is scaling, right? Everyone is looking to grow. So if you're scaling and you're trying to create this type of function in which you're in and which you've worked in, how would you guide them about the sequencing of building that capability and the processes that support it?
Yeah, so at Alteryx, it was interesting because I had the opportunity to build it from scratch. Right when I joined, it was 3 people, and it was primarily transactional, tactical. Building reports and dashboards and things like that. And that's usually how things start, right? Like you're like, hey, we need to start measuring some things. It's probably a good idea, and so they start investing in folks who some data wranglers can build some, Tableau dashboards or something like that. And that's usually how things start, in the beginning. But if you're, the way I've kind of approached it was, at Alteryx, it was a new leadership team. And so the first thing that I did was, all right, we need to understand like what's our vision as an organization. And so it really starts kind of with an alignment around the vision of where we're going as an organization. And so, I held a strategy offsite with the leadership team, and we aligned on our values, on, the vision of where we want to go, and, what's our ethos as an organization, as a leadership team. And then figuring out, okay, if this is where we want to go, how are we actually going to get there? And so we looked at across the organization on, okay, what are all the strategic initiatives that we need to execute on in the next 12, 18 months to actually realize that vision? And then how are we going to do it? And how are we going to hold our team accountable? And so, for us, it really came down to 3 main pillars of our strategy: was enhance the foundation, run the business, and then drive strategic opportunities. And so that's how we kind of thought about the different strategic initiatives. And one of the the big things that we were looking at was, I mentioned the adulting phase, right? And so the way I started with building out this team, and I'm going to use this to help understand how I approach it from a sequencing perspective, is I hired a business operations leader, and this person had over 20 years of experience at Cisco. Actually, funny enough, he gave me my first internship right out of college, so he's literally known me my entire career, and he's been a friend and mentor. And I convinced him and sold him, and fortunately, it's been a blast so far. But he has experience on, building these operations functions from scratch and understanding what it takes to run things at scale. And so coming into a smaller organization, he brings a wealth of information on, okay, we need to build, a metrics framework, right? Like what are our North Star metrics? What does success look like? And, working with each of the leaders to understand, hey, how do you measure your business? Like, what does success look like? How do you hold your teams accountable? So we look at, from a metrics framework perspective, we have primary metrics, which are our North Star metrics, and we have secondary metrics that are, important, but they help us explain why we're either meeting or not meeting our primary metrics. And then we look at those metrics from different categories, right? We have performance, and you have different performance metrics for support versus customer success versus PS. Yep. Speed, right? Like first time to response, follow-up response time, time to resolution for support as an example. Efficiency and productivity. Customer, CSAT, CSAT response rate from our surveys, NPS, things like that. And then knowledge, right? And ramp up time of our support teams and CS teams. So, really building up that business operations rigor, because that's the foundational element of how you need to run an organization. The next piece of that, which is logical, is once you've identified your metrics framework, you actually have to build the reporting and dashboards and all of the, the processes around managing that. And so building up, having some sort of BI analyst or analytics team to build dashboards. And you really need to think about it from executive level, right? If you're going to be presenting to the board or to the C-suite, you need to have clean, concise metrics that really are those North Star metrics. Then there's the functional, right? It could be the VP of customer success has more metrics and views that they need to look at to manage their business. And then there's the manager level. So, tying back everything you're doing from the company level imperatives and success metrics down to the individual contributor is really important. But you need to actually operationalize that by building all this reporting capability. Mm-hmm. And then the next sequence is, okay, you have, for Alteryx, we had 24 strategic initiatives. That's a lot.
That's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot.
It's a lot. And we knew we're not going to get to all of them, but they were all
Yep.
pretty important. And so, I actually created a strategic program management team, which is effectively a PMO that program manages each of these initiatives. So, we could just assign it to someone in the team and let them go figure it out and then come back later and provide updates. But that doesn't scale, and it doesn't hold the leaders accountable. And so we created a structure around an intake process, creating a formal charter for each of these initiatives, documenting, spending a lot of time understanding the problem statement before jumping into solution mode, and then having all of the reporting and visibility and weekly updates to the leadership team. And also for us, we doubled in size last year. So there's a lot of change, a lot of new leaders coming, not a lot of folks leaving. And with that, it creates a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt with the existing folks that are there. And so there was a lot of change. And so the importance of this function was driving that transparency and visibility. So everything that we were doing was updated weekly, and every employee in the organization had visibility to what was going on. And we really encouraged, like, hey, if you're passionate about these initiatives and you want to get involved, reach out to the stakeholder or the exec sponsor or the project lead. So, that transparency is really, really key. And then, thinking more broadly about services, you really need to think about, how do you make sure that you are ready for every new release or new product release? And so, we invested in building a services product management team and NPI, right? So our NPI program manager, she's really focused on building governance around every release and partnering with the product and engineering teams on the product releases, and then also for new service offerings that we're building out. And then our services product manager is looking at our existing offerings. Like, product management was kind of done within the businesses, right? They were kind of building offers, the pricing, they didn't really have, really great pricing models and pricing strategies. And so really building, some discipline around product management and the services team has been really, really powerful, because, the sales teams weren't really positioning these services. And so you have to think about the pricing, the positioning, the entitlements, and the value and the outcomes that it's going to drive for customers. So, that's definitely a really big piece. And then
just one quick question on that then. How many products are we talking about? What's how many things do you sell?
Yeah, so within the services organization, we have customer success, professional services, as well.
But how many different products? Is it like one product and then lots of different flavors, or are you selling multiple products into your markets?
So I thought you were asking on the services side.
Sorry,
yes.
on the actual number of products. Just for context around what this organization is supporting. Yeah.
Yeah, so Alteryx has 4 products. Our major product is our Alteryx Designer, which is a desktop solution, and then we also have Alteryx Server, and those are our most popular products. But we have other data science products in Promote, and another product called Connect. But but really, from a services standpoint, we have those customer success, we have professional services, and enablement and training as well. And so, it's really about, okay, what is our services go-to-market and our services strategy around supporting these products and making our customers successful? So.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot to think through, right? When you get to scale and where you get to a point of scale, it's a lot. The complexity rising is a phrase that should be on most teams' bumper stickers, right? So
and oh, go ahead.
No, Karen.
I was going to say, and then the last piece is, as you start growing, you realize, what usually happens is you scale linearly, right? As demand grows, you just keep hiring more people, right? So think of support, right? Number of support cases keep going up. Let's just keep hiring more support engineers to manage capacity. And so the next phase of maturity is investing in automation, right? So how do you scale exponentially versus linearly? And you have to do that through automation. So, investing in software engineers and product managers to really think through the requirements and meeting the expectations of our customers, but also, how do you drive case deflection? How do you, increase productivity in your CS teams and in your support teams and PS? So looking at delivery tools, allowing support engineers to write signatures to detect known issues in the product. So when a customer has that same issue, we don't have to waste, several days doing that RCA.
Yeah.
So And then lastly, what are those customer-facing self-service capabilities that you want to provide your customers that are now requiring human interaction today? So that would be kind of the last piece that is really important.
Yeah, the world of professional services, I mean, you've seen it several times over, right? And you helped to build resource management capability back at Cisco, and we talked about that when we were catching up, right? I think the one world where automation is more challenging than others is the world of services, right? If you look at support, if you look at customer success, there's elements of those roles that can be automated to, if you will, almost like give you more capacity. It's almost like you've got more people, right? Like, because you're almost cloning people because you can automate responses and things like this, or provide relevant content on an automated basis, for example, or CS touch points that are driven digitally and things of this type. The challenge in services delivery is generally there is a project, and generally it requires people on your side and their side. And so as you talk about this linear scaling, it's very, very challenging to do that in services, because without adding more people, and I think what we see is just companies, they kind of go a few directions, right? They go one, which is, let's figure out a way to build this product or rebuild this product or refine this product so that it is easier to deploy, right? Number one. And that's why you've seen so many companies, as they've moved from on-premise to cloud, like that's really been the exam question. And then, obviously the other side of it is like, you've got this inherent complexity to services delivery, because I've never talked to anyone in services delivery professional services who goes, yeah, I've got the headcount that I need, ever. Right? So you're always capacity constrained, and you've always got lumpy pipeline, because every tech company in the world seems to have lumpy pipeline, right? So it's like end of quarter is madness, start of quarter is madness. So you've always got that dynamic to it. So I think that's the one area which is very, very, is that fair? Do you think it's very, very challenging to do that? There's elements of automation, but I'm just curious to know your thoughts.
Yeah. So funny enough, when I was at Palo Alto, they actually offered a health check service from our professional services team. So they would go in and do, an extensive analysis of the customer's deployment, and it would take several weeks and probably cost $150,000 to do. And at the end of it, they would have a report with a whole bunch of recommendations. And we built that product I was mentioning earlier. It's called a best practice assessment, and you can actually go on Palo Alto's community and look it up and download a copy of it. But it looked at every feature of the platform, and it looked at how do you configure these things to defeat cyber attacks. And the funny thing is that actually a lot of what we built in that deliverable, which was really for customer success, was actually the same thing they were doing in that health check.
Right.
And so it ended up automating probably 80 to 90% of the manual delivery they were doing with a health check. So it's possible. I think it just depends on, I think it's probably easier maybe for on-prem type solutions, right? Because it's more complex and there's ways that you can do that automation. But in SaaS, you're right. I mean, it's much different. It's probably more people oriented, and, hey, it's like, hey, you have 2 use cases. Let's help you execute those use cases and, teach you how to fish, right? So that you can be successful. I would say it is definitely more challenging in the services space.
And then just picking up on you talked a little bit about metrics in what we were just discussing, which is clearly a big theme within your job. You sit in your, I remember you saying, like, in terms of your leadership team alongside PS and CS. And so talk to me about kind of what are the metrics that matter that you guys are looking at in your organization. Are there some shared metrics, for example?
Yeah. So, as part of that strategy initiative and rolling out the metrics framework, that was the key thing that we needed to figure out, right? And so our business operations director took all of these leaders through this exercise of pulling out what are those metrics, what really matters. And ultimately, like I do have the VP of customer success, VP of customer support, as well as the professional services team and community. We all have to say, okay, well, what are our shared metrics? So there are some shared metrics. So renewal rate, I feel like that's everyone's responsibility in the company. Net expansion, right? The bulk of our growth comes from our existing customers. And So obviously making sure that they're getting as most value out of the platform as possible and expanding into those accounts is a key metric. NPS, SLA adherence. I think that's kind of table stakes, but that's definitely something that we measure extensively. And then customer satisfaction. So those are our shared metrics. And then for the support team, we look at things like time to resolution, case deflection, how fast are we responding to our customers, because that's closely tied to our SLAs. Making sure that we're actually leveraging the knowledge and reusing all of the knowledge that the team's building to drive resolution for our customers. And then also looking at how many cases actually have defects, right? Because that really is an indicator of product quality. And so we have tight integration with our product and engineering teams to closely monitor that. And then from a success and services standpoint, we look at services attach, churn, services bookings and growth, and then services revenue is definitely a key metric for us as well. So,
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I would say the definitely the shift within, the shift that we're seeing is this movement away from kind of the inwardly focused metrics, which is still always important, right? Like things like services revenues and bookings and margin and all of these types of things. Like there's very few companies that are out there going, hey, do whatever you want and lose as much money as you want and we won't care about it. But I do think that there's much more customer centricity now around kind of this convergence between customer success and services, where you'll see more and more now these shared goals. And kind of working back from like, we enable value for our clients. What's that? What is that? Is that we're helping them manage risk, we're helping them drive automation, we're helping them improve productivity, whatever that mission may be. And if we do that at scale, we drive ARR. I think increasingly there's seen as a direct link between like the NRR metric, one of the ones you've talked about, renewal rates, and time to value, right? So it's like, it's now kind of table stakes that customers are expecting you to deliver quickly, or at least what you promised to deliver to them. So I think it's one of those. It's why we always talk about these metrics that matter, because it's about what matters as much to your customer as it does to you. Because if we've only got inwardly focused metrics, then eventually we'll be obsessing over those and we'll actually lose sight of kind of what's important, right?
Yeah. I think for us, it's just at this point in time, we're in building mode, right? We're building this organization out. And prior to our chief customer officer and me coming here, they never had a P&L, right? And we're really managing this organization like a business. And so this is just stage appropriate metrics for us right now, but you're exactly right. Where we need to move to is time to value, feature customer adoption, really, and then also, are they actually executing on the use cases that they set out to actually buy our platform, right? So those are all things that we're building out in our customer success organization. So I see these metrics evolving over time, but these are the ones that we kind of had to come up with that where we're at.
And I love the I love the going back to like your first gig is like the music gig with, what was that band name again?
Chain Link Fence. Immune to Malady. Yeah.
Immune to Malady. Immune to Malady, a real mouthful. Yeah. But I love the fact that you like landed in your first gig, and it's like you're talking about billions of dollars at Cisco. Funnily enough, I was telling you this. We've had a lot of the Cisco alumni on. I've been talking to. It's kind of weird. Everyone's kind of gone through there at some point. Yeah. So you've seen these different kind of state. You've sort of started massive, and then you've gone massive, less massive, big again, and kind of you've seen all these different altitudes, as it were. What are talk us through kind of some of the phases that you've seen, because you've seen them in different order, right? You're kind of seeing the scaling one now, right? And you saw the big one to start with, you saw the big enterprise one to start with. So talk us through like the different phases and kind of what you saw and any pattern recognition or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm, the right person to coin new phases or anything like that, but maybe I can just explain, what I saw in each of these companies at a high level. And so at Cisco, I think, I always say this, like it was one of the most well operationally ran companies that I've ever seen. And I've yet to see a company run that efficiently.
I've heard that a lot. Yeah.
The one thing that I think about is how is that possible? How is like all of, it's 120,000 employees globally. How are they all aligned? And it really comes down to a strategy framework that they developed called VSEM. There's V2MOM. There's other companies have their own, but it stands for Vision, Strategy, Execution, and Metrics. And the CEO has his own VSEM, right? And then every leader down to an individual manager has their own VSEM. And there's actually a white paper that you can look up and read about it, but really it's all about driving a communication medium and driving collaboration across the company. So when you're meeting with other leaders, you know exactly what their priorities are and what their team's focus on. Like, hey, you're working on that. That's actually important to me. We should actually team up and work on that together. So that was one major differentiator, that everyone in the company aligned to that. And then I think the other thing that stood them apart was they had very, very mature finance organization. And their FP&A processes, it was, when I look at the finance teams that I've worked with over the years, the level of maturity, it's just a stark difference. And having a really strong finance partner is very, very crucial in running an organization and a business. And then lastly, the other thing that I noticed was, when I at Cisco, every organization has a business operation function. You're in product, engineering, sales, every organization, right? Services, everywhere. And so you had this common language that we all used, and we had a business operations manager. Everyone knew what that was and what the roles and responsibilities were. Right. And going to Palo Alto, it was interesting because the founder, Nir Zuk, great guy, visionary, and just very inspiring guy. He prided himself on he came from Juniper prior to that, and he prided himself on not having program management and and these kind of support functions. But as I noticed like that's actually a challenge, right? As we were scaling as a company, we needed more of that. And so I actually didn't have that in my organization. And so it's funny, I talked to my boss, Matthew Staubel, who's our chief customer officer. He ran support and services there. And he said, yeah, he's like, operations, it's really hard to find an effective leader who can do all of these things. He's like, what we did there was we had BI analysts, we had maybe some NPI, and then business systems analysts working with IT on our systems. That was it. That's what we called operations. And when I was in the customer success team, I didn't have all of these traditional operations, capabilities that I left at Cisco. And so I just did it myself because I knew how important it was for showing the value that my organization is delivering to the business. And then also using that as means to justify incremental investment in my team. And so, I think, at Palo Alto, there was a huge, balancing act between centralization versus decentralization. But they didn't have that common strategy framework or language and these operations functions, and it really caused friction. It's
the glue, though, isn't it? Really, I mean,
it is.
It's when you want to move somewhere and you're required, and you've got to bring a lot of people with you. You kind of need that, otherwise, you've got lots of people saying, "Oh, well, I thought that was your role," or this, and it's that it's not handovers. It's like the transitions between teams as you're going to the next level. It's like there's underpinning things that people just can't do in their day job because it's a full-time job.
Yeah. And then, so I went large to small, and now I'm back to large to Oracle. And so I was expecting, I'm going to get more of what I had at Cisco. This is going to be fantastic. But I went into this organization, you're either a support engineer or a support manager. That's it. Yeah. They had very, very little operations capability. And so again, I felt like I had to build things from scratch, right? Like really the operations teams, all they did was analytics. And, it's interesting because they were actually kind of in their infancy. They were in, I would say, adulthood when it came to their databases and their, on-prem applications, but they were in an infancy when it came to cloud, right? They took their on-prem support team, moved them over to support cloud, and it was exactly the same model. Everything was reactionary. Getting access to the customer data, even though you're managing the infrastructure, was a challenge. And so, they're making a lot of strides in that area. But you can see that, even within companies, they're at different phases as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then coming to Alteryx, complete infancy when we started. So
yeah. So okay, so let's turn to I'm kind of just looking. I'm conscious, like, I want to cover a couple of other items with you. So
sure.
One of the things we talked about was this, because you've got your internal processes and operations where you're really that's driven by, we want to scale, right? And there's a piece that informs that scaling, which is the customer, right? Yep. And how the customer buys, right? So what the buying behavior, which influences your commercial organization, sales and marketing, how they're served, right? And everything that happens post sale, and services and success and support. And so talk to me a little bit about, like, the matrixing of customers versus more traditional, like, old school segmentation theory. Tell us a little bit about kind of some of your thinking and what you guys do there.
Yeah. So when I think of traditional, and it's still heavily prevalent on the sales and pre-sale side, they really segment customers by active ACV or ARR and TAM, right? And that's still very, very important, right? From a prioritization perspective, that's still what you do. And you align your sales organizations that way. But the challenge in customer success is that we have to touch every customer. And so, and also, you can't have, let's just say there's a small mom and pop shop in Kansas, and one guy is opening, 100 cases a month, like, or really hounding your CS team. We can't support them and also support, like, a PwC or a KPMG or our largest accounts. They're not the same level of service. So there's different ways that we're approaching it. And, it's looking at, I think ACV is still important, and we call it, and then runway is another thing, about TAM and growth potential in the accounts. Those are really important. But then we also look at what we call renewal health score and just overall customer health. And there's a lot of different inputs that go into that, right? And then the other element is looking at, not just, hey, how many licenses have you purchased? Have you consumed those? But looking at how they're using your product, right? So are they using just, in our case, just data prep and blend? Are they using geospatial? Are they using predictive or machine learning capabilities? How extensively are they leveraging your platform? And then also, what's the penetration within all of your users in your account? And so we actually have a digital customer success team that has taken all of these inputs, working closely with our data science team, and we've created a digital customer status. And this is really what we look at from we try not to use the word segmentation because that confused the sales teams, but it's really a status of where we think the customers are at. And it's, we use on schedule, monitor health, retention at risk, engagement, activation, high priority retention at risk, and growth. And, through all of this telemetry and all of these inputs, we then, leverage our CSM platform to drive account event triggers, right? So our CSMs can really focus on those high value interactions and solving customer issues very quickly. And so that's how we think about it from a segmentation perspective. And then on the support side, it's very similar, where we need to take care of our largest customers, right? Those customers who are, investing heavily in our business. We have different metrics, goals, and targets and SLAs that we've internally set for our teams. So it could be first time to respond, it could be CSAT. We have higher CSAT goals for those accounts. So I think it's, customer success and support is a little bit, we look at it differently than the traditional segmentation model.
Right. Okay. So, and then if you think about kind of how the world's evolved since when you started working, right? And you mentioned when you were at Cisco, was it called now Advanced Services, and it was called PS, or it was called Advanced Services, and now it's called PS? Is that
no? So yeah, it was customer advocacy way back when, and that includes support and PS.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
it broke off into technical services, which is their support
Right.
organization, and then advanced services, which was PS. And
Yeah.
now, since I've left, it's now customer experience. So now
Right.
support and PS are back together. And
Yeah.
so and now they're starting to invest in customer success as well.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's all
Right.
under the customer experience umbrella there. Yeah.
Okay. So like we talk a lot on this show about the the convergence between these worlds, right? Like you have, if I go back in my career and when I worked with, I've always worked with large tech businesses, kind of the number one complaint is you hear about silos, right? You've got these silos between these departments. We talked about it earlier, like the cracks between the two. And that's why your function is so important in the glue that binds these things together and drives the strategy and operationalizes the strategy in terms of execution. So we talk a lot about this world of convergence and how you've got sales and services and success and everything really is trying to work in harmony. Kind of what's your take on that evolution? Because it just feels like there's just this blurred lines that everyone's dealing with. Is that something that you guys experience at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, prior to last year, we had no professional services at all. It was just a very, very small customer success team. And the only quote unquote PS offering that we had was enablement days. And so yeah, I do see that happening. There is a convergence, and it's really important that, the customer success team, support, and PS are tightly integrated and aligned in making sure that everyone's on the same sheet of music, because, there's multiple touch points with the customer. We all have to understand what the customer priorities are, right? What outcomes we're looking to drive, and also making sure that the left hand, knows what the right hand's doing. And so often how you do that is through data and, the tools that you have, and making sure that wherever, our internal teams are at, they need to know what's been going on in the account. So, Gainsight or your CSM platform helps with that. There's other solutions out there, but I think data is really the heart of, making sure all these teams are integrated and understand what's going on in the accounts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's the accountability and ownership is the place of confusion, right? Like it's the who owns what and when. If things run smoothly, like we know what's, like you were saying earlier, we know what sales does, we know what finance does, we broadly got a view of like what that customer journey is. I think it's in the gray areas, right? It's like if we're trying to do something more quickly than perhaps we expected with a customer, or more complicated, or where we have to mobilize resources in different ways, or with higher expectations from the customer. I think it's just that accountability, because the customer just sees you, right? You're the vendor. They don't give a shit if you work in CS or support or services. I mean, we get people trying to book demos through our support channel, which I always find quite strange, because there's a massive book a demo button on the website. Maybe we need to make it bigger. But I think that's the thing, right? The client just sees you and not all of these all of these different teams, right?
Yeah, and so like you talked about, what's the RACI, or how do you divide the work up between the different teams? And so, one thing that I find really helpful is really understanding that customer journey and what is the customer engagement model, all the way from pre-sales and discover all the way to that retention opportunity, and say, what are all those touch points and customer engagement that happens, and then what teams are involved or responsible for each of those. And so, having that documented, making sure that every new hire understands that, and, in your boot camp and your onboarding, and then just keep refining that over time. It's never perfect. It's an evolving product, and we continue to iterate and improve that over time. But yeah, you definitely need to invest in putting that down on paper, because oftentimes you'll be surprised, like, oh, I didn't know we were doing all of these things, or this team was doing that, right?
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, listen, thank you, Nate, for taking the time. We've covered a lot of ground, and I think there's a lot of tangible content in there, which, because it's a very operations and operationalizing things is it's very data heavy. it can be quite challenging, but I think you've kind of elevated it to a level where there's some really practical guidance on this. And this season is all about kind of like taking some outside in thinking. So we've got some views from VCs who are very like data driven. We've got folks like yourself and operators in businesses that have got this kind of mindset as well. So really appreciate it. If you want to find out more about Nate's company, head over to alteryx.com, ALTERYX.com. And I'm sure if you've got direct questions, you won't be adverse to a LinkedIn connection.
No, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm always willing to help people out and share any knowledge that I have. Yeah, so happy to do that.
Well, thank you again. And thanks everyone for listening. So I've been forced, not asked, but forced by my marketing department to now start asking for this. So if you enjoy the show, please subscribe and please give us a review on whatever podcast service you are listening to, whether it's Spotify, Google, Apple, whatever it may be. I mean, we're a bit like the BBC, so other podcasts are available. Nate, have a great weekend. Are you taking the dogs for a walk in the Arizona sun? Is that the plan?
Yes, and I'm actually going up to northern Arizona to my grandma has some property up north, so going to visit my grandma and yeah, spending some time with some family. So yeah, should be a good weekend.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Take care, Jonathan.
Take care.